Rach, I am in sunny Tenerife getting some last minute winter sun, topping up the tan, ready for a bleak UK Christmas. You're in a fluffy jumper. How's life back there?
It's cold.
Yeah.
I'm in a fleece.
That's exactly what I want to hear. I don't want any kind of like jealous. FOMO from this end at all. I'm overlooking the sea. There's a gorgeous beach down there. I'm in a lovely little villa with my partner's family. It's been quite the...
That's a big step.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
we should take that off the pod.
That's for the Upfront late night sessions.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving swiftly on. What's your moments of the weekend? Go on, mate.
Do you know what? I actually really struggled with this. I had such a long weekend. Trying to get back down from Liverpool using UK trains was not the easiest situation. So Saturday was a bit of a write-off,
to be honest.
It would have been quicker. Saturday was a write-off, and Sunday I sat in the rain and shot Crystal Palace versus Ipswich Town, which, to be fair, was quite a good game. Mm-hmm. So I might just give it to that game, because we're going to talk about the Subway League Cup, the poor sister of the FA Cup, I think, and the lack of attention it gets. But actually, it was a very enjoyable game of football, so I'm going to hat tip that, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I'll go a little bit deeper than that with the Crystal Palace game. We've obviously chosen about both moments of the weekend, but I want to give it to Emma Watson, grabbing a brace in that game, reacting sort of very fast from that spilled corner, and then quickly after with that beautiful, lovely curl into the top corner. Super, super impressive. I thought it was like a really like lovely moment of individual brilliance from Emma Watson, and also really nice to give like a little nod to my former club, who I do miss very, very dearly, and hope they return back to the WSL 1 very, very soon.
I thought you were going to say, I hope they like return my text or something. It kind of felt like they forgotten me entirely.
I've been trying to get back into the squad for a long time now. Right, let's get stuck into the Subway League Cup drama. Newcastle United 3-3 with Man City. Man City obviously walking away with the additional point, winning 7-6 on penalties. Just a reminder, this weekend was still the group stages of the League Cup. So Newcastle got that point, and like I said, Man City got those 2 points. But I think they'll probably see that as a point dropped going into that fixture. Really, really spicy from Newcastle, taking an early lead from that 25-yard screamer from Lois Joel. Joel scored one from even further out against Bristol City only last week. I mean, if you haven't seen the goal, definitely go and see it, because I think the best moment about that is how... I think it was the reaction from Man City players and the fans alike. The fans went absolutely mental. Crowd of 3,000 at the Gateshead Stadium. But it was just such a beautiful strike. I mean, Kiara Keating had absolutely no chance. She was completely planted to the floor and could only watch it sort of sail into the corner. But yeah, Rach, what did you make of that opener and sort of the impact that created from Man City?
I actually thought Newcastle deserved the opening goal. I thought they'd put a huge amount of pressure on City early on. I was really impressed with how high they were pressing them. They could see that City were kind of being a little bit sloppy and a little bit nervy at the back, and they capitalised on it. It was quite a mature kind of performance, I think, particularly early on. Unbelievable goal, but I also think they deserved that lead. I thought they held on a little bit at times, which I think is understandable. I thought, momentum ebbed and flowed a bit, and Manchester City could have and probably should have scored a number of goals, and you might have kind of watched up until the 60-odd minute or so and think City should be comfortably ahead here. But then Newcastle had those moments as well. They came back into it. I thought they managed themselves well, knowing they were playing against a team who are second in the WSL, are very good at keeping possession, arguably going to be a better quality football club, in terms of fitness and quality as well. And I thought they kind of managed that pressure from City quite well. Arguably, a lot of that was down to wayward finishing as well from a number of players at City. But I just thought it was quite a mature performance from Newcastle to be able to kind of ebb and flow with the game and create more at the end and get themselves back into it. Like, that's a really difficult thing to do. You get down 3-1 to a top WSL side, you would be forgiven for kind of hanging your head and thinking, okay, this one's gotten away from us. But the fact that they're able to get themselves back into it, and you could see that from a number of the experienced players in the squad not believing that it was over, which I really rated. And there was a couple of games this weekend that were really quite enjoyable games. Not that I'm saying that in a surprising way, but given how little coverage the Subway League Cup gets, there are some spicy fixtures.
No, well, we're going to definitely go stuck into the sort of format and sort of the importance of the Subway League Cup and sort of what everyone's been thinking about, like what it is as a tournament. But 100%, I've got to agree with you, Rach. I mean, Newcastle absolutely took the game to Man City. It very much felt like a bit of a David and Goliath kind of underdog story. But at the same time, like I was looking at the stats and you're thinking, okay, they had 41% of the possession, Newcastle. They had 12 shots. 9 of those are on target compared to Man City's 10 shots with 5 on target. But like I said, I think it was the mentality and kind of the resoluteness of the squad. I mean, they got that early goal. They were probably thinking, okay, like we've got to hang on to this lead. And then obviously Laura Coombs gets the equaliser. And that sort of like close range effort, you're thinking, okay, it's going to be a little bit tougher now to come back into the game. And then you go 2-1 with that Hasegawa, the close range goal again. Absolutely great goal, like smashing it past Mo, and she had absolutely no chance. And a lovely great assist from Bene there, who seems to be sort of going from strength to strength every single weekend. And then there was a little bit of controversy on the WSL YouTube upload of the full game where Hasegawa's goal,
and it's still there,
just wasn't there. Much to the annoyance of people in the comments. That's just, and we will get on to kind of like the broadcast and like the Subway League Cup in that respect. But like you said, Rach, like going 3-1 down, you're thinking this isn't great. Obviously, you've got the mistake then from the Newcastle keeper kind of. I can see what she's trying to do. I think she could have caught the ball. I think she was in enough space and there wasn't enough bodies
really
around
wet,
her that I think she could have just claimed it. But I think like in that moment, you've got a lot of bodies around you. I think your natural reaction and instinct is to just punch it clear and kind of clear the danger. But ends up kind of making a weird contact with the ball and kind of maybe like skimming the ball with her knuckles, which then sends the ball back into her own net. A bit of a fumble. And then obviously sending the game into 3-3, that Hale shot at the end. You can see the Man City players then in kind of absolute disbelief that this is going to take them into that penalty shootout. But yeah, I mean, what was your kind of overall take on the game and kind of getting into that penalty shootout as well, Rach? Because it was a good penalty shootout. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I do. It's one of those, like when you're watching it, you think, okay, Newcastle really deserved the lead here. Then you get to a point where you're like, okay, City should be in front by a couple of goals. It gets to 3-1 and you think, that's probably fair. But then as the game carries on and Newcastle get back into it, you can't help but feel like they absolutely deserved then to get back into it, even though I think City were wayward. And look, they made changes, Manchester City, you know, there were players coming in. It felt a little bit disjointed in that respect. You could maybe put it down to that. You could see them then bringing on the big guns at one point, where they were making, I think, a triple sub or a double sub. And you can see that they were like, okay, and that tells you, I guess, things aren't going our way. We need to make, it was Greenwood and Blinkilde-Brown and Miedema coming on at the same time. So you can understand that kind of, they were like, right, we need to turn the tide on this game. It still didn't really work, obviously, you know, and they were 3-1 up at that point when those players came on. So it wasn't necessarily because they were like, right, we're in trouble here. Do you know what I mean? So the fact that Newcastle were then able to get back into it despite kind of players like that of that calibre coming onto the pitch makes it even more impressive. Penalty shootout, I felt for Moan in goal because I would argue, got closer than Keating to a number of those penalties. And
definitely.
You could see she was raging. Like she'd get her fingertips to it. She pushed one onto the post and it didn't quite go around it. Came back in. Like I felt for her because I would imagine it's more annoying getting close to a penalty save than being miles off it.
It's the frustration, I think, because you know you've gone the right way, you've trusted your instincts and you've made the bet and it's paid off, but like you're just like an inch or so away from like the actual final hit. And you've got to give like credit to like how well she was so frustrated with herself when she got off it. You could see her kind of like just like fist clenched, like, oh God, I was so close to it. And obviously like for them, like that would have been a massive second point to have taken from Man City. But you know, Bonnie Shaw, Alex Greenwood, Wahabi breathing a sigh of relief, like each one of their pens, not particularly well taken, to be honest. And I don't know whether that's sort of like getting used to that ground. I know they obviously haven't played there that often, but at the same time, like you should be absolutely smashing the roof of the net off with these. Like the Hasegawa pen was absolutely incredible. But yeah, I think obviously Man City sort of walking away with that additional point did feel a little bit, I don't know. I think it's one of those ones you kind of wanted to end evens, like even scores, just 1-1. I think that would have been an accurate reflection of what went down. And you can see, like for Man City, it did feel like a disappointment. Like the celebrations were so muted, and it just felt a bit flat at the end. But the Newcastle fans absolutely loved it. Like
well,
all
they got
day.
a game, didn't they? And come here to me. What kind of penalty taker would you be? Have you had to take penalties before?
I think I might have taken one.
What
But
was your, like, because I hate these little stutter starts, the stop starts, the, 10-mile run up, the little itty bitty steps, like the
I'm
fancy
putting my foot
placement,
through it.
the try and chip the goal kick. Just bury it.
No,
I don't understand all that fancy shit.
Choose a corner and put your foot through it, and that's it.
Absolutely bury it.
The pace of the ball, naturally, regardless of where, as long as it's not in your direct range as a keeper, you're not going to save it. So just put the pace on it. But yeah, a bit of a difficult one for Newcastle take, made probably a little bit even more difficult by the fact of the news breaking a few hours after the game that Becky Langley is leaving the club. A little statement from Newcastle there. She said that she's played a significant role in the club's rise since being appointed in 2019, achieving back-to-back promotions to take the team from the 4th tier to the Women's Super League 2. At the helm as Newcastle turned fully professional in 2023, becoming the first 3rd tier side to do so, and led the team during its first ever matches at St James's Park. But yeah, obviously super happy with Becky, but they're parting ways. I mean, Rach, it's a weird timing of this one, because it kind of felt like a bit of a success for Newcastle to do so well against a top WSL side, and at the same time, obviously they've not been doing too well in the league, currently sitting 9th in the table after 6 matches, and they've obviously, recruitment wise, they've done loads of amazing stuff in the summer, but yeah, don't seem to be finding the sort of right sort of relationships and balance.
But even then, if you kind of dig into their results, their 2 losses are against Charlton and Birmingham, who were 1st and 2nd of the table. I think their issue is that they've had, 3 draws. And that's probably what's killed them a little bit, because they're drawing against teams they probably would be expecting to beat. I think they drew against Sheffield, maybe against Bristol, if I remember correctly, Crystal Palace as well. So that's kind of what's killed them a little bit, I think, in terms of the table. But we all know in WSL 2, it can be very tight for a long time. You're not entirely down and out, I think would be fair to say. So while I appreciate they've got ambitions, they've never been shy to kind of say that they're a very ambitious club. 6 games in, to be 9th, I appreciate you're kind of 4 points off 4th. It's not, the worst thing in the world. So I think it's interesting, and maybe we're not getting the full story, is all I'd say. I just think, to come off the back as well of a Subway League Cup result like that, a performance like that, yeah, the timing felt a bit weird. And maybe it's because of international break, and that's kind of the time that clubs make these decisions if things aren't going well in the first block. But yeah, I think it was a bit of a surprise, all right.
I think it's like early days as well. Like, you're not even halfway through the season.
We've got
yet.
new players.
It's that. Like, it's going to take time to let them gel. And as we sort of said, the kind of recruitment they've done over summer. I mean, some of their signings included Jordan Nobbs, Aston Villa, obviously, Molly Pike, Gemma Perfield from Southampton, and Una Savinius from Rosengard. And you think, okay, well, like, let these players. It's the same thing as London City Lionesses. Like, you've had all these like players leave. You've got a load of players coming in. You're still trying to find like how they're all going to work together and like what the great formula is for that. But yeah, it doesn't feel like they've, at least give her till January, give her another recruitment season to kind of like see how, things are doing and whether she needs to plug any gaps and sort of change the strategy a little bit. But it did feel a little bit early. And now obviously it leaves a bit of a gap while they've got these sort of interim managers in to kind of shore the ship until they find someone new. But yeah.
That's the other thing that I find interesting as well, is when you get rid of a manager and you've not got a backup plan, it doesn't make it feel like, look, it's only 6 games, so it can't have been a particularly long thought out process. The fact that it's happened where you've not got something in any way prepared, if you like, makes it interesting, because is it then based purely off results if you suddenly decided to just pull the rug? I'm trying to look at what their last result was 2-2 against Bristol City. Again, Bristol City are up in 4th. It's not like that bad. It was, bad a result to look at it and go, oh my God. Like, so yeah, I just find that a interesting timing, interesting statement, and an interesting decision for sure.
Well, pending, we'll wait and see how it impacts Newcastle and who they bring in. It feels like there's a few managers who could sort of step into that space. Still haven't figured out where Laura Kaminsky is going to be. So maybe that could be something on the horizon.
Putting the little seeds out there, planting seeds, Chloe.
Well, I'm just saying I love Kaminsky. And this is not me saying it from any point of view of actual facts or knowledge. But yeah, it could be an interesting one. In the same group, another second tier side pushed a WSL team all the way. Nottingham Forest facing Everton. Forest, who was 6th of the WSL2, held Everton to a 1-1 draw before losing 4-3 on pens. The last time these two sides played each other in the 5th round of the Women's FA Cup at the start of last year, Forest lost 7-1. So slightly different situation. Absolute credit to Nottingham Forest. And I love the fact that some of these teams are putting the WSL clubs to absolute task. These are not fixtures that you go into with any complacency anymore at all.
Yeah, and Everton don't really have not that they don't have depth, they do, but they are dealing with injuries. So it's not like they put out like a younger squad or, anything like that. Like, they went out absolutely to win that game.
Coming up after this is that time of year again. We discuss the format of the Subway League Cup and share some of your thoughts. All right, we're going to move away from the games a little bit. We wanted to talk a little bit more broadly about the League Cup itself and the format. It was only back in March that The Guardian reported that the future of the competition was in doubt, given all the new plans for English football and all the things that the WSL football wanted to do and their transition over from the FA. Many have kind of questioned the format of the competition in the last few years, like the group stage format introduced in 2016, those additional points that you get from winning in the penalties, and the regional divisions often criticised as being quite overly complicated, and yet nothing has changed for this season's competition. I, as a player, kind of have a little bit of I don't know, I feel quite friendly towards it. I think in terms of like the priorities for a club, when we were at Spurs, like the priority was always winning the league for us. Like we were nowhere near even sort of Champions League, so that wasn't even kind of on our radar at that point. But the league was always the bread and butter for us. The FA Cup and then the Subway League Cup was always kind of like last on the list. And that was when you'd have players in the club who would be able to kind of get their minutes. You'd have like the younger players being able to kind of get a bit of a run out, or your second goalkeepers, i.e. me, would be able to actually play the games. They were always like, sometimes they were kind of like these night fixtures that were a little bit fun. Like you had like the night games, and like generally speaking, like people got around them a little bit, and it was a good chance to kind of play teams that you otherwise wouldn't play. I mean, it's obviously the only competition that you kind of have, a structure in terms of the WSL players playing the WSL2 players, and the WSL2 players being able to kind of see where they are against some of like the best in the world and the best in UK football. So there was a positivity around the Subway League Cup, but in terms of how seriously clubs took it, not so much. And I don't think it's really had the best running because Continental Tires didn't really put any investment behind it and kind of take the cup forward, so that you didn't find that there was loads of marketing around it or loads of kind of, calls to action to come to the games and loads of activations at the games to kind of, say like, look at this amazing format that we have. It's totally different. It's got all these benefits of seeing these young players and seeing like emerging talent and, seeing these like the top two tiers of women's football go against each other. There was no clear messaging. So it just kind of felt like a bit of a meh cup, but I think the potential is there for it to become a lot better. But Rach, what do you think? How do you feel about the Subway League Cup? Do you feel excited when those games come around every year?
Well, what annoys me about the Subway League Cup, I think it absolutely serves a purpose, right? And I actually don't think the format is that complicated. Mm-hmm. I think we're almost not encouraged to dislike it, but we're not encouraged to like it. I think what annoys me about these discussions about how can we improve it, should we change it, should we scrap it, is that we've not actually given it any sort of chance to see how it can do. We don't invest in it, we don't promote it, media barely covers it, clubs barely talk about it. Some clubs, and fair enough, use it for young players to get opportunities, which is one of the things that it can provide. So it's not really fair then to decide, is it an effective competition when we're doing very little to actually promote it and push it. So that's my first point, I think. Secondly, it does serve a purpose. We talk a lot about overloading in women's football. There's also underloading in women's football. There's clubs that don't play enough football. They might end up having 2-week gaps, which is a really difficult way of getting any kind of momentum. Players are equally at risk of injury if they're not playing enough and they're not getting the right kind of explosive gameplay action that they need. So you've got clubs then who might not go far in your FA Cups or, aren't in the Champions League, not getting enough games. So it serves a purpose there as well for clubs to get more football, for players to get more football who might need it. It allows teams, as you say, to give younger players a chance if that's what they feel that this competition is for. There's an opportunity to do that. There's an opportunity, like I look at your likes of West Ham and Everton's and, Liverpool, teams that have maybe struggled a little bit to click or to be consistent across 90 minutes have an opportunity to go and try and get another 90 minutes under the belt before maybe a big WSL game and try and get things to click. You know, I watched West Ham beat Brighton, a WSL team who are doing a lot better than they are in the League Cup. I hoped that would be a platform for them to bounce off. Not quite yet, but, you know, it serves that purpose too as well. I just think that there's such little effort to make it accessible. You know, there was one game this week that you could watch on YouTube. That's crazy. It's barely promoted to actually know when it's on. So I do think there needs to be a collective effort from those involved to actually try and push it before we decide it doesn't work or before we decide nobody cares. Because, of course, if you're not, you know, it just reminds me a bit of a club going, well, we've put our women's game in the big stadium and nobody comes. And it's like, well, yeah, you haven't marketed it. You actually have to market. You have to tell people it's there, when it's there, how to come, what's available. You know, if you don't do that, no one's going to invest in it. So, yeah, I always get a little bit irritated about these competitions because I don't think we're actually giving it a fair chance to succeed. And I think the lack of coverage as well from media contributes to that. But at the same time, sometimes games are on the same time as Champions League, who are a stretched media cohort that probably have one person in their outlet covering women's football. Where are they going to go? They're already trying to choose more often than not between 2 English teams in the Champions League or 3 English teams in the Champions League. You think they're going to go, actually, we'll go and do the Subway League Cup, which apparently nobody cares about.
No, 100%. I totally agree. And I think one of the things that I have loved about the new Subway partnership, so in December, the WPLL announced the multi-year deal with Subway to become the title sponsor of the competition. And then the sponsorship agreement's for 2 years. So I think it's going to be super interesting to kind of see how Subway activate around it. I would say that already, I mean, and this is not just obviously because we've worked with them, but we did a really lovely watch party around the Subway League Cup final, which was really well attended. That was a sellout. They have activations at the games where they're doing kind of super subs and kind of fan engagements. And obviously they got stuck into the some of the games from last year in December. They were doing some Subway
so for the season that I've seen.
And I think sort of handing out tokens and things like that. And I think obviously they came into the competition last year super late. You're already halfway through the competition, the final being in March. So they didn't have long to kind of put together something. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see sort of how they then activate it, because it does take a long time to kind of get your head into, you know, what the strategy is. But also you've got this uncertainty around whether the WPLL are actually going to keep this tournament as it is or change things up. I mean, we've just seen last year we had a new tournament added with the World Sevens. We've got the World Sevens happening in December, so there is a certain amount of fixture congestion happening, and it'll be interesting to see sort of where the Subway League Cup fits within that, because they are additional fixtures essentially. They are,
but I don't think the World Sevens is going to affect it. You're hardly even going to have an English team every time. There just might be an English team sometimes. I think, I mean, so far, and I've not been to loads of Subway League Cup, to be fair, there haven't been loads, but I haven't really seen any activation so far. But I also think the bar is set so low for investment and, you know, for sponsors to come in. There's no kind of like excitement developed or anything like that. And yeah, I saw it at the final and we had some sandwiches in the media room, but like the group games should be considered exciting and important too. And that needs to be a collective thing from the clubs, from the league, you know, barely getting tweets, like, you know, any kind of coverage of when it's on and where to watch it, or if you can even watch it. So yeah, I'd like to see a little bit more from Subway rather than just waiting until the big teams come in and the quarterfinals happen. Because at the end of the day, it is a trophy. And, you know, there's not that many trophies to fight for in football. You
and
know,
it's the first one of the season. First one to get a bit of silverware in March, yeah.
I mean, is it to be sniffed at? Do you want to go, I'd rather not win the Subway League Cup than win it? Do you know, Millie Bright proudly wears that Arnold Clark Cup medal, I'm sure. The Golden Boot medal, you know what I mean? Like, I just think it's interesting how people who don't win it say they don't care, or like slag off the team that does win it. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's a trophy. There's 3 of them, 3 domestic trophies to win. Do you not want one? Like,
100%.
Do you just want the same teams winning it all the time? Do you know what I mean? I think it's an interesting one that, yeah, it annoys me, the conversation around it. And look, I'm the same. I'd like to be able to cover it more, but nobody engages with it. So like now we're kind of in that balance of like, well, if no one's even engaging in the coverage that we do provide, why do we go out and pay for our petrol or whatever, our transport, and go and cover a game? So I do think it's a collective effort, I think, if it's to stick around. And I do think it's weird the WPLL just randomly kind of go, no, maybe we'll get rid of it. Maybe we won't. Who knows?
I think that was a bit rogue, sort of signing on Subway and his multi-year deal and then saying, actually, we might just get rid. Apparently, that conversations were had with Subway that was the intention. So obviously there is some element of risk there. But in terms of the conversation around this cup, we wanted to open it up to our listeners. So we asked, how would you change the League Cup? And got a lot of responses. You guys feel very, very strongly about this format, and I can't wait to get stuck into some of these. There were kind of two patterns that stood out in particular. We had Beth, Lucy, and many more of you saying, make it so that we can actually watch the games, which is 100% what you said. In terms of actually being able to access the games, it was sparse, absolutely sparse. And obviously, if you can't see the games, you can't actually get that excitement around them. And then things like the Hasegawa sort of YouTube situation where you're not even showing some of the main goals, it doesn't lend itself to kind of being a high quality premium product.
Well, it shows you don't care. So why should I care? It's 100%. That kind of vibe.
And like even like the camera work and stuff, it kind of felt a bit of a throwback to the FA player. You're kind of watching the game. You can't really see even like how some of the goals have even like been built up. You can't see the angle of the goals. Like that first goal from Lois Joel, I was thinking, I mean, because I obviously wasn't there, kind of watching the game back again. And you can't even see like how Kiara Keating didn't see it or like the angle of it and like where it actually, it just, it's not premium enough. You can't access it.
I'll take one camera. I'll take one camera. I'd take it. Because currently there's zero. So, if it is one of those shaky things where you feel like when you have to go down, there's a corner and you're like, oh, God, we're going to, or you feel like you're a bit on a ship or whatever. At this stage, I'd take it. Wipe the lens. Like, I'd take it because there's nothing else. Like I said, the bar is low here. Just show the games.
Mm-hmm. Well, 100% totally agree. And then the other camp of you, and we had a WSL SE. I'd love to know what that stands for. Please let us know in that acronym. And a few other listeners saying, stop the teams in the Champions League spots automatically going to the quarterfinals. Rach, what are your thoughts on that? It does feel like a bit of an easy win, like having your best teams essentially just leapfrog everything else. And I know you have an element of that in the FA Cup, but it does make more sense in the FA Cup. Like, I'm not entirely sure I kind of see the relevance of Man City going and thrashing, I don't know, a tier 7 side 20-0 or whatever it is. And that's no disrespect. That's obviously no disrespect at all to the lower league clubs. But I think that makes a little bit more sense because there are more teams in the game and it makes sense to come in at a more competitive level. But when you've only got a very small cohort of clubs involved in this thing anyway, I think, everything should be fair game to me personally. So I agree with you, WSL SE.
I can see both sides of it, and I can see why it kind of calls the integrity of the competition into question a little bit because it's such a small competition and there aren't that many fixtures. So I can totally understand the irritation. Then the other side of me thinks, but it happens in the FA Cup and that's absolutely fine and nobody bats an eyelid. So the concept exists in a cup competition. But yeah, I think because there's so few kind of fixtures and it is just WSL 1 and 2, I can totally see why that's like an irritant. So it could be a case of either having them in from the beginning, and that's where we see the overloading issue with a team that's in the Champions League trying to play a fixture on the same day as a Subway League Cup fixture. How's that going to work? Like they're always midweek on a Tuesday, Wednesday or Thursday. You can't have, Chelsea playing on Wednesday and then having to field a team in the Subway League Cup on a Thursday. So that's scheduling issues. You could just not have them in the competition at all, but then how's a club going to win a domestic treble if they can't actually access one of the competitions? Mm-hmm. So it is definitely an interesting one.
Well, a lot of you suggested even more radical changes, indicating perhaps that many viewers wanted to be totally overhauled and turned into a brand new thing altogether. So we had Mr. Toothpaste on Instagram, and I'd love to know where that name come from. Yeah. He said, or she said, put the National League teams in and make it a knockout tourney, which I think could be quite interesting.
That's just the FA Cup, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah, and then I think it's an interesting one because I think the National League is obviously becoming more professional and kind of getting into more where the Championship now sits. So I think it's a really good time to increase, I suppose, that exposure for Tier 3 of football. We have been focusing very heavily on Tier 1, little on Tier 2, and then Tier 3 doesn't seem to get anywhere near the kind of good stuff. But I think that could be a way to kind of increase exposure on a smaller scale for sure.
To a degree, but then you still have the issue of underloading for teams. You get knocked out early, that's it. So, like, something Sophie has floated a number of times that she thinks could help address that issue of underloading for teams is that if they don't progress out of the group stages of the Subway League Cup, that there's a plate competition for them to go into. So that
Okay.
the teams then that don't then get into the quarterfinals go into a plate and, challenge each other for the Subway League plate competition, if you like. It means that they carry on into January having those additional fixtures rather than what ultimately happens, which is they don't get out of the groups. They don't have any more fixtures. They don't have Champions League. They don't have, so that was one suggestion from Soph, which she's floated a few times, that it continues on the competition then. And if there are teams coming in from the National League, I don't know how it would work. That would be an awful lot of fixtures. But it carries it on into January then, which would be an option. But yeah, it's a hard one. Adding more teams in adds more fixtures. Doing it knockout style adds less fixtures for a lot of teams. I guess it's what is the objective of the League Cup, essentially?
Well, a very good response to that might be coming from Robert M on X/Twitter, who said that we could just drop the WSL 1 teams out, get rid of those, and then make it only for WSL 2 teams and below, meaning even more matches, more money for small clubs, and a chance for those teams to win a trophy. Otherwise,
is
and
it
this
more
is
money?
his words, otherwise it's all a bit meaningless if a team enters at the quarterfinal stage and wins it after playing only 3 matches. Obviously, there is this kind of, the fans want to get involved. I love the fact that there's been so much kind of like discourse around how this format looks and like whether there is this opportunity to bring more clubs in to kind of increase the kind of attention, support, investment at kind of all levels, but at the same time, Rach, the fear that I do have is like how much of an appetizing product is it to be able to then sell to sponsors, and then how much are we actually going to see in terms of like the broadcast situation.
This is what I was going to say.
It's like absolutely this works if there's an infrastructure around it, but I don't think the infrastructure at WSL 1 and 2 level is even there to kind of benefit new and sort of less tiered clubs coming in.
But also, and like these are great ideas, and these are clearly people who are engaged and would go to games. We like across social, like so much of the conversation is all the media focus on at the top 4, and then when you do stuff that isn't top 4, it doesn't get engaged with. So people are great at saying do more of other teams, give the opportunities to teams who aren't getting the coverage, bring in more teams in leagues that aren't getting the coverage. Then people don't go to the games. They don't engage with the piece you've written.
I think that's the difficulty with this. Like I 100% back it that, you get the National League in, and then actually is there going to be that appetite to watch the games that we see if the WSL 1 clubs aren't included in that? So I think it is, but then if you don't do it, then they always stay in the same position and nothing changes.
Yeah, so you can look back at women's football 10 years ago and we were having the same conversations about, do we put them in main stadia? Are people going to come? If we put it on TV, will people watch if we do it regularly? And it takes time and it takes investment and it takes hard work. And if you're willing to do that for the top tier, you have to be putting in that work for tiers further down. The problem is the game is moving at such a rate and the goalposts essentially are moving every time now that the expectation for women's football further down the tier is to be better and to be better covered and to be better engaged with than it is. So people are only really willing, because it's still a young sport and because you're not getting your money back and you're not getting a return on investment yet, people are only really willing to invest in areas where they're more likely to see a return quicker. And it's frustrating, but it's a stark reminder that actually, yeah, we might be packing out stadiums for the Lionesses on the regular, but that doesn't translate completely into money in your pocket yet. So that's the difficult balance of all the effort and that's been put in to get the game to where it is now is needed for leagues further down. But the commitment from people, it's hard to expect those who are investing without that return yet to go, okay, it's great that you're doing this and you are going to see a return, but can you now do that whole process again and wait for a return? And that's the frustration, is that we grow so fast, we want everyone to grow too, and our expectations are so high, we expect it to happen quickly, and it doesn't happen quickly. And that's the frustrating thing. We all want it to grow quicker and more coverage, but actually what does that entail is still a big ask at the moment, and we want it to happen now, but it's not going to happen now. It's going to take time.
100%. And I think another area of focus, and you were saying there, Rach, in terms of the money and the investment and kind of, the appetite for teams to want to join the Subway League Cup. I mean, let's talk a little bit about the prize money, because this is another area of contention for our listeners who kind of chimed in with a few bits and pieces on this too. So the prize money for this season's competition has not been announced. All we know is that the sponsorship deal with Subway is worth $1 million. In 2021, The Athletic reported on prize money in what was then called the Conti Cup. The line was that there isn't even any prize money for progressing through the various rounds of the competition, just a nominal amount split between the two finalists, which kind of
What's
the
the point?
cost of, I think it's that. And for the National League clubs to be involved in the competition, and the Championship clubs to some extent too, some of those that have smaller budgets and aren't affiliated with sort of big Premier League sides, like your Charltons and your Birminghams to some extent, like that kind of gravy. Like, you think about the cost that it will take to actually be a part of the competition, the travel that it takes, the kind of the accommodation, the food and everything else that goes with it. And then you think about the fact that even if you do progress into the quarterfinals, like, you're not even being compensated for that. So actually you enter the competition and probably come out of the competition at a loss. So in terms of the financial benefit for clubs, I think until that the prize money pot changes and it becomes more of an FA Cup style model where you do get at least some money to reimburse you for the costs outlaid, I don't think it makes sense for the National League at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't think a club should be out of pocket taking part. I mean, look, I know you pay for it in the league and stuff, but yeah, I just think it's pretty poor if you've got this sponsorship. I think the minimum is that clubs should be able to recoup their costs of going and attending and taking part in the games.
100%. And then the last comment of all, Rach, and this alludes to what you were saying earlier, we had Jazz Cunnington on YouTube, maybe perhaps the most important point, saying legally change it to the Conti Cup so I can stop correcting myself whenever I talk about it, which is 100%. Very valid. Yeah,
Turns out
incredibly valid.
They did a pretty good job of marketing, even though we didn't see any of it, because it is ingrained in our brains as the Conti Cup, and it will always be the Conti Cup.
I think they never activated it, but I think just having the name there for 4 or 5 years was enough to kind of embed it, and maybe that's what the Subway League Cup does.
Subway could do something really funny, and they could bring out like a new Subway dedicated to the WSL and call it the Conti Sub.
Coming up after this, we have the amazing Italian journalist Nicky Bandini to discuss all things Le Azzurre. For this final section of today's pod, we're turning to international matters and we are joined by a very special guest. Nicky Bandini is a brilliant journalist and a regular host of our fellow Stack show on the continent. She knows everything there is to know about Italian football, so we're going to be picking her brains on this. Today, we're discussing just how much of an impact the summer has had on the women's game in Italy and how the national team is shaping up heading into this international break. Nicky, thank you so much for joining us. Really happy to have you on the pod.
Gosh, I'm feeling the pressure now after you said I know everything there is to know, but very, very happy to be on. Thanks for having me on.
We are going to put that to the test. You're the expert in the field, well over me and Rach. So we want to know everything. We want to pick your brains on everything Italian football, and we will. To be honest, we are going to probe. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Euros, because obviously we've just come off the back of an amazing summer for Italy. I feel like it really kind of established them and put them back on the map as being one of the greats in the game. It was a harrowing game to kind of watch, losing obviously 2-1 to England in the semi-finals, but that was the furthest they've gone in the Euros since 1997, where they reached the final in what was then just an 8-team knockout. First of all, how much did that run and this team kind of capture the public's imagination over in Italy? Because over in the UK, we feared the Italian squad like no other. I think there was maybe a bit of complacency of kind of seeing Italy and England match up and thinking, okay, on balance, this should be an England game, absolutely fine. But Italy's run of the tournament had been so incredible that you really did not know which way this game was going to go at all. But yeah, what was the reaction like over in Italy?
It was definitely one of those things where it's hard to gauge exactly when we talk about capturing the public mood, like exactly where things have landed. For certain, it's the most interest that I've seen in women's football in Italy for a long time. And you look at the hard numbers. I think it was just over 4 million people watched that semi-final on Rai Uno, which is about a bit more than a quarter of the market share, which is good. I mean, you put it in perspective sometimes when you see other things. And for instance, the men's team, when they played their World Cup qualifier against Israel this month, was 7.6 million. So still a gap there that feels bigger than you want it to be, I suppose. And I think I was frustrated at times with the way I saw it being covered in the Italian press. I mean, leaps and bounds forward from the World Cup, by the way. I think infamously, we remember the World Cup in Australia, there were press conferences for the Italy camp where there was literally no Italian journalists at them. And that was pretty grim. And obviously there's things that go into that include travel and distance and things like that. But still, the absolute lack of coverage was really something in that tournament. And I think, for instance, like when Italy won the quarter-final of these Euros, I was, of course, picking up all the papers the next morning, and Gazzetta dello Sport, the biggest national daily sporting paper, it was on the front page, but it wasn't the lead story. You know, it was a banner at the top of the page, and the front page was still mostly given over, I think, to yet another Ademola Lookman transfer story. So there were times where I still like wanted to get in there and give people a shake, but it was definitely causing or getting more attention than women's football has traditionally got a lot of the time in Italy, and I think that was a meaningful impact. And you kind of go from there to the more anecdotal. I was in Italy for the semi-final. I was in Bologna, and I remember going into a bar to watch that game and asking them, "Can we have this game on in an hour's time?" And honestly, the bar staff didn't know it was happening, even though it was a bar that chose for sports, and that was a bit of an eye-opener. At the same time, by the time the game was done, we had, I don't know, 60, 70 people in the bar all watching the game. So it's hard sometimes. I do think, for better or worse, sports, and it feels wrong to divide this way between women's football and men's football. I shouldn't be talking about those two things as two different sports, because it's the same bloody sport, but just in terms of the way it's covered, it's treated almost like it is a different sport in Italy. And I think it's a bit that, what I would call, for a British audience, it's almost like the Wimbledon effect. There's a lot of interest when there is the big thing that's happening. And it was the same recently, that the women's volleyball teams had a lot of success as well. And when that's been happening, it gets a big buzz and a lot of attention. But then people, as soon as it's over, can forget about it again quite quickly. And I think that's a bit where it felt like things were this summer. It was great. It was exciting, and people were talking about it. Really, in one of those odd, not lovely life moments. Actually, the reason that I was in Italy for that semi-final was because I was there for a funeral, my aunt's funeral. So I saw a lot of my family around that time, and I would say all of them knew about the women's team. All of them wanted to talk to me about the women's team. All of them wanted to hear about stuff. And then when I asked them who was watching, I would say there was a pretty solid divide between the older family members who were honest about it and said they weren't watching, and the younger family members said they were watching. And maybe that's like the encouraging part, is generationally it felt like perhaps more interest among younger members of the family than older ones.
I wondered as well, because there was a real romanticism around Italy's journey in the tournament, and I wondered if the manner in which they went out would have maybe a bit of a bigger impact, because it reminded me a bit of, I don't know if you remember this, when Laura Bassett scored that own goal in the 2015 World Cup, and there was such heartbreak because you kind of felt like this was their moment to get into a final, and they lost it in such a kind of almost cruel manner. And there was that kind of feeling around the Italy team. They were so close to this final. There was, I was at their quarter final where they beat Norway, and just the emotion and the passion from the fans in the stands, from the players on the pitch, from Giurelli getting those goals. And it just felt like one of those romantic football stories. And I wondered if the manner of their exit would kind of hit home a little bit further than if they just lost like 3-0 in the semi-final. I
think that's definitely true. And I think maybe this comes back a bit to my feelings about like the Wimbledon comparison in growing up, because I'm half Italian, but I did grow up in Britain. And I think, that so much of these stories, the way they resonate with people, comes down to individual characters and individual personalities. And of course, in England with Wimbledon, it was always Tim Henman, wasn't it? Tim Henman getting close and never quite getting there, and that for such a long time made people, I think, relate to him in a different way. And I think that, if anything, for me in sport, the cult of the individual, the cult of the personality is bigger than it's ever been. I think that with the way young people follow sport, you're both much younger than me. I'm an ancient when it comes to this stuff, and I look at the way I think younger people relate to sport. A lot of it does come through much more social media channels and how they feel about individuals, and you see that in terms of how clubs recruit even now, thinking about the commercial side of things and what it's going to do for social media impact. That is absolutely a conversation that happens at board level with recruitment sometimes, and I think that Girelli certainly and Bonansea have had that cultural cut through in Italy. I think they already had it to some extent, but they achieved it much more because of the way this tournament went and their role in it. And I think those figures now have a cultural resonance, an awareness in the mind of the Italian public that they wouldn't have had without exactly the images you're talking about, the emotions, the goals that the oh my God, we were so close moments. I think those things absolutely have an impact. The tricky thing, of course, is I've just named two people who won't be playing for that much longer for the national team, and so you need different people to come through and keep sustaining that. But I do think, yes, emotional investment in people's stories has a big knock-on impact for how much people care in the end.
100%. And I think we find that in sort of UK football as well, where we kind of place so much emphasis around some of the big heroes, the icons, your Rachel Daly's at one point, your Chloe Kelly's now, Michelle Adjaman's kind of become a hero in her own right after the Euros. But you mentioned there sort of Girelli obviously being so crucial to that Italian side, and she did there were so many magical moments that came from her and so much passion, and you could see how much she kind of delighted fans every time she stepped onto the pitch. And obviously you mentioned there, career-wise, she's 35 years old. She's my age. She's kind of maybe knocking on the door of retirement at some point in the kind of nearish future. Although you never know. You've seen players go on and play for many more moons, so I don't want to cap her career in any sense. But such an experienced player. Obviously, this was her fourth Euros that she played in. Do you kind of see her continuing to be a leader and a kind of figurehead for this side? And do you feel like potentially Italian football might be missing out on making more of those individuals and kind of heroing and profiling them to kind of raise awareness around the team as well?
Yeah, I think Girelli has been pretty candid about it, actually. Like she said, I was thinking this might be my last tournament beforehand, and then I got to the end of it and I wasn't sure I wanted it to be anymore. And she said that she's going to listen to her body and her mind, was I think her way of putting it, and decide where that goes. And I was listening just last week to Francesco Totti talking about how basically he regretted retiring when he did, even though he kind of got forced into it a bit by the end, and saying that he thinks he could still have been playing on. You think, well, he's 49 now, and maybe at some point someone does need to give you that nudge, and you don't want to be that person who needs to be forced out. And I think Girelli certainly is not at that point. Clearly she was so impactful this summer, and I think she in the way she's spoken has shown a lot more self-awareness perhaps than Totti sometimes does. I mean, she said quite specifically in one interview recently, I want to keep on playing, but I also am conscious that I don't want to be the person who's getting in the way of younger players having their chance and having their opportunities. I think she's really got that opportunity to be, again, a cultural cut-through figure. I hope she'll still be playing at the World Cup in a couple of years. I hope it'll be at the World Cup in a couple of years. I think that you want to believe there will be enough competition that it will be hard for her to start in 2 years' time, and that's the problem, I suppose, for Italy going forward as well. Is this squad showed so much good stuff this summer. In the end, they did still rely a lot on Girelli and Bonansea for those goals, didn't they? And I think that's a question which the national team has to solve going forward.
Well, it was only after Italy made it to the quarterfinals of the World Cup in 2019 that the Italian Football Federation made commitments to turn the top division professional by the 2022-23 season. I think it's pretty normal in women's football journeys for various nations that the national team is the strongest force to bring more cultural focus onto women's football. Have we, I guess, seen that more in Italy since that commitment? Are we still over relying on the national team again, which I think is quite normal? It was the same in England. It was very much the national team focus first, and that started to filter down. And I just wonder, do you feel like this journey we might see a little bit of that filtering into the domestic season this time around?
Yeah, it's really tough, I think, still to know exactly where that's going to land. I think there's a lot of mixed signs. The first hugely disappointing sign was there was this, I think, horribly botched in terms of management and how they threw it together and how they advertised it. Serie A Women's Cup that they ran effectively right before the league season started, which is kind of a League Cup style tournament they tried to run in a shorter time frame. It was a new tournament. They tried to make it buzzy and exciting off the back of the Euros, and then they fell completely flat on the TV rights. They had a TV rights bidding window where basically they didn't get any serious bids, and they had to do some last minute scrambling to get the games aired at all on a couple of different platforms, and then you saw those games being played mostly in not very full stadiums. Like the final got 2,000 fans or so, and right after the Euros, when you've had such excitement around it, it's really disappointing to come from that. Now, I think it would be hugely oversimplifying to say, well, that's the whole picture. I think that tournament was put together too quickly, with not enough thought about the logistics of it, with not enough thought about how they were going to make sure it did carry that good stuff forward. And I think that unfortunately speaks to the state of Italian football federations, not just Italian Football Federation, frankly. I mean, I think you could talk to it at club level as well. Just the way that Italian football has been run in myriad different ways across the men's and women's games. There's very often this approach of jerking knees into quick fire decisions that aren't well thought through and coordinated and done in a way that's going to lead to the best result, in my opinion. So I think that was a bit of a come down to go from the Euros into that. I think that in terms of the overall health of the women's game, I think it's very much one of those, you need to take a step back and see the big picture things, because yes, the season's now up and running, the league season, attendances, I think you could certainly look at them and think they feel pretty underwhelming. We're talking less than 1,000 people at most games, and that's not where you want to be after the Euros, where everything felt so big and buzzy. There was a survey done in was it June or July, but too early to really see the impact of the post-Euro, certainly, which was showing that you had 45,000 or so registered women's players in Italy, which is an increase of 7% from last year. If you go back much further to when they started tracking these numbers, 2008, it's gone up from 18,000. So the growth is there. It's absolutely happening. It's just happening not at the rate of for instance, other countries. You could contrast with England, and it's more like 200,000. It's 4 or 5 times as big. Same in Germany, places like France, Spain a little bit behind, but still ahead of where Italy's at. So it feels like we're still in this phase of baby steps going forward, and you can't take all the negatives, because I feel like I've just said a lot of negatives about, it isn't where we want it to be. You have to look at the big picture and say, well, it's moving in the right direction. Do I think they could have done more in terms of a bit better coordination of trying to capitalise on the moment they had this summer? Yes, I do. And that's why I keep saying it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed picture. It's not been immediately snap your fingers transformative, but I think when you dig into the numbers and you look at things, especially again, kind of calling back to what I said before about maybe the attitudes even in my own family, generationally, you can look at the increase of 10 to 15-year-olds playing, girls playing in the same period. I think it's gone up from 6,000 to nearly 20,000. So those are numbers that I think speak well to how things are trending. It's just it's a slow march rather than a sprint.
Well, I think that was going to be my next question, to be honest, in terms of the impact of the Italian women's national team being in the Euros and how well they progressed, sort of, and the impact that then had on domestic football. Because we normally find that even in the UK, we're sort of seeing, the Lionesses do super well, and that leads to a direct impact and a positive sort of uplift of, attention, sort of awareness around domestic club football. But I mean, Serie A obviously only resumed at the start of this month, and Juventus obviously claimed the title last season, having been dominant, sort of a very dominant force in the league for so many years. Do you see the sort of major clubs kind of stepping in and trying to increase investment to make the league more competitive, or do you think it just still feels like it's just Juve and Roma sort of putting in that and sort of having that kind of big intention in the league every year?
I think there's a broader base that's growing of clubs that are putting that attention into it. I think again, want to talk about some positive signs. I think the decision to expand the league back to 12 teams this summer is a signal that there's clubs that are willing to put the investment in to make that worthwhile. I think you hear how, especially some of the foreign owners who've bought into men's football have also been wanting to put their attention into women's football as well, and I think that's been impactful. For instance, Parma with Kyle Krause, as soon as he came in, he talked about wanting to invest in the women's team, and he's done that. They've come back up to the Serie A this season. Como as well. When you listen to the people who are running that club talk about how they view the club, they absolutely talk about the men's and the women's team consistently, and you see it in the way that the clubs are improving on the pitch. So I think there has been a broader base of investment into clubs. And I think that is slowly increasing the depth of the league, increasing the competitiveness of the league. You could look at, even again, the Women's Cup, the fact that Lazio beat Juventus in that cup maybe gives a little signal that there are other teams that are going to push a bit harder this season. So there are signs of gradual investment. I think the offset for Italian football a bit is that you're seeing some of the very best players. And bear in mind, we're a few years on now from professionalism in Italy, and that change, which has obviously been good. But you are seeing some of the best players increasingly looking to want to take their chances somewhere else where they can get to play in front of bigger crowds in more prestigious settings and have that experience as well. So obviously Sofia Cantore was already in America. Now Lisa Boatin's there as well. Caruso's gone to Bayern Munich. Linari at the London City Lionesses. You've seen quite a lot of Italians, of Italy's best players, looking to make those moves elsewhere. And I think that's probably for the good of the game overall anyway. And I think that's not stopping there from being competitive football played in Italy as well. But I think that there is definitely a broader base of investment, whether it's the level of investment, whether it's the right nature of investment. Those are all things that we can question. And I think that for me, one of the things that still bothers me a bit is seeing how many of the teams are playing far away from what feel like their homes. I mean, Juventus play in Biella, which is an hour and a half's drive. Yeah, from the centre of Turin. It's like 2 hours by public transport.
And it's a tiny town.
Yeah, exactly. And then you see they do play, for instance, Champions League game against Benfica at the Allianz Stadium, and they get not a huge crowd, but they get 5,000 fans or so. It makes a difference, I think, where these games get played, and that stuff is a frustration for me, certainly.
Well, I mean, I feel like you're talking about a lot of things we've gone through over in England, and it does improve. So that's the one thing, is that it does get better. So here's hoping. Looking back to the national team, they play on Friday, first game since that semi-final. Feels like a really long time. Playing Japan and then Brazil in this window, and then you've got back-to-back games against the US in the next window. What's the mood like around the team going into these fixtures? Is there excitement about the fact you're playing the US twice? Does that still hold that kind of excitement factor?
Yeah, I think there's actually huge excitement around these games coming up. Certainly within the camp. Again, there's a separation between how I feel about it, how the players feel about it, and is all of Italy paying attention? I'm not convinced that right now all of Italy's paying attention. Hopefully when the games actually arrive with the coverage of them, that will help build that up a little bit. But listening to Sonchin, the manager, talking about it, and just you could hear how proud he is, honestly, that these friendlies are happening at all. Because the fact is that these teams didn't necessarily want to have friendlies against Italy until quite recently. These teams are looking for competitive friendlies against the most competitive teams in the world. And as he said, getting to the semi-final, playing like we did against England, that makes USA, that makes Brazil think, okay, this is a worthwhile friendly for us. This is something that's going to give us a good challenge and help us to continue in our World Cup preparations, the same as it's helping Italy. So I think from the perspective of the players and the squad and the coach, there's a lot of excitement coming into these. We'll see what it does in terms of making a ripple in the media coverage. But I think there's a feeling that we earned this amongst the actual people involved in it. And it's obviously, I think these ones right at the start of a season are always a bit awkward. I think that goes men's and women's games, the first international friendlies, when you're just getting started, your club sides are a little bit tricky. There are some players going to miss them through injury as well. But I think these are going to be fun games to look forward to.
Well, looking a little bit further ahead, obviously we've got the qualifying cycle for the 2027 World Cup, and then this next few years. I mean, it's madness that we just finished the Euros and we're sort of already talking about the next major international competition. It kind of feels like give everyone a break, give everyone a minute to breathe. But do you feel like it feels like the sort of beginning of a chapter for the Italian team, or the sort of end of a cycle which might need sort of rebuilding soon? What's your take on that?
Yeah, these are questions that I've thought about quite a lot. I think I thought about it even as I was watching the aftermath of that semi-final. You thought the problem is, again, I think I already said it earlier, the two players who ultimately were the ones putting the ball in the net, which I think in international football is just even more of a thing, right? I think because you have less time to work together, because you have less time to build those automatisms that are so important in domestic football, just having players who are going to do that for you really matters. And that's why when you look at the age again of Girelli and Bonansea, not to repeat myself, but you think that does make it hard for this project to go forward as it is. You do need other players to step up and have that moment. Now, I think there's some really encouraging signs, actually, and maybe this goes back to what I was saying before about the increasing youth take up in Italy. There's some encouraging signs for Italy in the bigger picture, because Italy also got to the semi-finals of the under-17 and under-19 Euros this summer. Giulia Galli and Eva Schatz are both shortlisted on the shortlist of best young players in Europe. So you have got some really encouraging signs in there. And you've also got some players who I think really have taken that step forward and become leaders on the team, like Cantore this summer, who you think, well, yes, she's going to be at the heart of the next thing. Whether it's an evolution or it needs another rebuild, I think that's a bit harder to say with 2 years still to go until the tournament itself. And I do think even this summer when I was watching it, because of that thing I just said about automatisms, part of what I was thinking was, well, Cantore, Bonansea, Girelli, these players had played together a bit at club level before, and so they knew each other. They know each other where they're going to be, and they know that stuff. So is it this next group that's going to have to carry forward? Is it going to need to be based maybe a bit more about this Roma side that is currently top of the league and showing the way more than the Juventus team that perhaps is having its own little generational shift at the moment, with some of those players moving on and some of them reaching these later points of their career? I don't know is the answer for 2 years' time. 2 years' time still feels like a long way off. But hopefully Sonchin can find the right balance. And I do think the other thing I always say about international football, we talk forever about the tactics, about the players. I think international football comes down a lot to the vibes. I really do. And that's my opinion as someone who's covered a lot of football, not just my opinion as like being lazy about it, because you have to want to be there. You have to want to be part of that project. You have to enjoy spending time with each other. And I think that so far Sonchin has managed that really well. New tournament, new thing to build up to, but I have a certain amount of faith in him to do that.
Watch this space, essentially. Not too sure it's going to be the OGs still sort of paving the path, or whether there's new waivers coming in. But yeah, still got a couple of years left to go to kind of see what happens. But thank you so much, Nicky, for joining us and giving us all your expertise.
Thanks so much for having me on. It was nice to have the excuse to talk about it. I don't get that many chances to talk about it, so thank you. It was fun.